Princess Evelyne of Eldoria wasn't exactly known for her sparkling wit or captivating conversation. Okay, let's be honest. She wasn't known for any kind of conversation at all. Ever since a childhood fever, the poor girl hadn't been able to utter a single word. Zip, zilch, nada. Now, in a kingdom where courtly life revolved around witty banter, political maneuvering, and the occasional snarky gossip session, being mute was kind of like showing up to a royal ball in your pajamas. It just wasn't done. The court, a collection of gossiping nobles with more concern for fashion than compassion, treated Evelyn like a piece of furniture, decorative, maybe, but ultimately useless. They'd smile politely in her direction, then turn away to whisper behind their bejeweled fans. Such a shame about the princess, they'd murmur, their voices dripping with faux sympathy. A mute princess. What a tragedy. Imagine no witty comebacks, no clever insults, no chance of snagging a powerful husband. Her father, King Alaric, wasn't much better. He was a decent king in a cares more about his hunting dogs than his daughter kind of way. He acknowledged her existence mostly out of a sense of duty, treating her with the same detached affection he reserved for his prize-winning falcons. "Evelyn, my dear," he'd say, patting her head with a distracted air. "You look well, yes, very well. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a rather important meeting with the royal falconer." Then there was Queen Isolde, her stepmother. Oh, Isolde, where to even begin? Imagine a peacock crossed with a viper, and you'd be halfway there. Isolde had arrived at court with her own daughter Seline, after Evelyn's mother had conveniently and suspiciously succumbed to a sudden illness. Isolde treated Evelyn with a thinly veiled contempt that would have made a dragon blush. "Evelyn, darling," she'd purr, her voice laced with saccharine sweetness. "That dress, it's so last season. Perhaps we should donate it to the royal goat herders? They might appreciate the rustic charm." Seline, Evelyn's half-sister, was a perfect miniature replica of her mother, only with a higher-pitched giggle and an even more impressive collection of hair ribbons. She delighted in tormenting Evelyn, whispering cruel jokes about her silence, tripping her in the hallways, and generally making her life a living hell. "Oh dear, did I spill my wine on your new slippers, Evelyn?" Seline would simper, her eyes gleaming with malicious glee. "Such a shame, but you really should speak up for yourself. No one can hear your silent complaints." Evelyn, unable to retort, unable to defend herself, would simply retreat to the solitude of her chambers, her heart heavy with a loneliness that even the most exquisite silks and jewels couldn't alleviate. So it came as no surprise that when the king announced Evelyn's betrothal to the powerful Duke of Vardenfell, the court was practically giddy with excitement. Not because they cared about Evelyn's happiness, mind you, but because it was a convenient way to get rid of her. "The Duke of Vardenfell!" they exclaimed, their voices laced with a mixture of awe and relief. "Such a powerful match, such a distant dukedom. Evelyn will be so far away. We'll hardly ever have to see her again." Evelyn, for her part, felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps this marriage, this exile to a distant dukedom, would offer her a chance to escape the suffocating confines of the Eldorian court, to find a place where her silence wouldn't be a mark of shame, where she could build a life of her own, away from the whispers and the disdain. Little did she know that her marriage was not a path to freedom, but a carefully orchestrated trap, a betrayal that would shatter her illusions and unleash a power she never knew she possessed. The night before her wedding, Evelyn found herself unable to sleep. A knot of anxiety tightened in her stomach, a strange premonition swirling within her. She decided to take a walk in the palace gardens, hoping the cool night air and the scent of jasmine would soothe her nerves. As she wandered through the moonlit gardens, she overheard voices, hushed and conspiratorial, coming from the king's private study. Curiosity piqued, she crept closer, her heart pounding with a growing sense of unease. It was her father, King Alaric, and Queen Isolde, their voices barely audible through the thick oak door. Evelyn pressed her ear against the cool wood, straining to hear their words. "The poison is slow-acting," Isolde was saying, her voice laced with a chilling calmness. "The Duke will be dead within a week. No one will suspect a thing." Evelyn gasped, her hand flying to her mouth to stifle a cry. Poison? The Duke? What were they talking about? "And Evelyn?" the king asked, his voice tinged with a hint of concern, though not for his daughter's well-being. Evelyn realized with a sickening jolt. She will be blamed, of course, Isolde replied, her voice dripping with venomous satisfaction. We'll plant evidence, forge letters, whisper accusations. The Duke's enemies will be eager to believe her guilty. She'll be executed for treason, and we'll be rid of her once and for all. The king chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. Excellent work, Isolde. You've outdone yourself. Evelyne stumbled back from the door, her mind reeling, her heart shattered. Betrayal. It was the only word that could describe the icy wave of shock and despair that washed over her. Her own father, her stepmother, they had planned her demise, her execution, all for the sake of political gain, to appease the Duke's enemies and secure their own power. Tears welled up in her eyes, hot and stinging, but she blinked them back, refusing to let them fall. She had been a pawn in their game, a disposable piece to be sacrificed for their ambitions. They had used her, abused her, and now they were planning to discard her like a broken toy. But Evelyne, even in her despair, felt a spark of defiance ignite within her. She would not go down without a fight. She would not let them win. She would not be their victim. She fled the gardens, her mind racing, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and fury. She had to escape, to warn the Duke, to expose their treachery. But where could she go? Who could she trust? As she ran through the darkened corridors of the palace, she stumbled upon a hidden passage, a secret door leading to the dungeons. It was a desperate gamble, but she had no other choice. She slipped through the door, her footsteps echoing in the damp, musty air. The dungeons were cold, dark, and silent, the only sound the dripping of water and the scuttling of rats. Evelyne, shivering in her thin nightgown, found an empty cell and curled up in a corner, her arms wrapped around her knees, her mind racing with a desperate hope that somehow, someway, she would survive this night, this betrayal, this nightmare. But as the hours passed, as the darkness deepened, and the silence pressed in on her, despair began to consume her. She was trapped, alone, abandoned by those who were supposed to protect her. Her dreams of a new life, of escaping the cruelty of the court, were shattered, replaced by the cold reality of her impending doom. And as she sat there, in the darkness, her heart heavy with grief and betrayal, a strange sensation began to stir within her, a tingling in her throat, a pressure in her chest, a feeling she had never experienced before. It was as if something was trying to break free, something powerful, something dangerous. Evelyne didn't scream. Screaming was for princesses who hadn't just overheard their own father plotting their demise. No, Evelyne did something far more unexpected, far more unsettling. She spoke. "Damn them all," she rasped, her voice hoarse from years of disuse, yet filled with a chilling power that echoed through the dank dungeon. "Damn the king who betrayed me. Damn the queen who schemed against me. Damn the sister who envied me. Damn this kingdom that cast me aside." The words, raw and ragged, poured out of her like a torrent, a lifetime of suppressed emotions, of unspoken pain, of silent fury, finding release in a single, devastating curse. And as she spoke, the very foundations of the dungeon seemed to tremble. The stone walls cracked, dust raining down from the ceiling. A cold wind swept through the corridors, extinguishing the torches, plunging the dungeon into darkness. But Evelyne didn't stop. She continued to speak, her voice growing stronger, her words weaving a tapestry of destruction, a symphony of despair. "Let the crops wither and die," she cursed, her voice echoing through the palace. "Let the rivers run black with poison. Let the earth crack and swallow the foundations of this kingdom. Let the royal court know the price of their betrayal." And as her words echoed through the night, the kingdom of Eldoria began to crumble. By dawn, the once fertile fields were barren, the crops withered and blackened. The crystal-clear rivers that had sustained the kingdom for generations turned into sluggish streams of toxic sludge. The palace walls, once a symbol of the kingdom's strength, cracked and crumbled, their foundations weakened by unseen forces. The royal court awoke to a scene of chaos and despair. The king, his face pale with fear, stumbled through the ruined gardens, his cries of disbelief echoing through the desolate landscape. Queen Isolde, her carefully crafted composure shattered, railed against the injustice, her curses directed at the heavens, at fate, at anyone but herself. Seline, her eyes wide with terror, cowered in her chambers, the weight of her own betrayal crushing her spirit. The whispers started, spreading like wildfire through the panicked kingdom. "The mute princess," they murmured, their voices filled with awe and fear. "She has cursed us all." Evelyne, locked away in the dungeon, felt a strange sense of satisfaction, a bitter triumph amidst the despair. She had been silenced, ignored, betrayed. But now her voice, her curse, had been heard, and the kingdom that had cast her aside was paying the price. News of the curse spread through Eldoria faster than a bad case of court gossip. It wasn't just the wilting flowers and the polluted rivers, though those were definitely causing a stir, especially among the ladies-in-waiting, who were quite attached to their floral arrangements and afternoon picnics by the river. No, it was the sheer weirdness of it all. One minute, you're enjoying a perfectly normal breakfast of pheasant and figs, and the next, your chair is sinking into the floor, because the stone tiles have decided to spontaneously reenact a sinkhole convention. Not exactly your average Tuesday, you know? The kingdom was in an uproar. Farmers panicked as their crops shriveled, merchants wrung their hands as trade routes became impassable, and the royal chefs nearly fainted when the entire wine cellar transformed into a swamp. Apparently, notes of mildew and frog weren't the desired flavors for the upcoming royal banquet. And then there were the rumors. Oh, the rumors. They spread like wildfire, fueled by fear and a healthy dose of overactive imaginations. "It's the mute princess!" shrieked old Martha, the fishmonger, waving a moldy carp in the air. "She's turned into a sorceress! She's cursed us all!" "I heard she made a pact with a demon," whispered Thomas, the baker, his eyes wide with terror. "He granted her powers in exchange for her soul." "Nonsense," scoffed Agnes, the tavern owner, slamming a tankard of ale on the counter. "She's just a poor girl, driven mad by her family's cruelty. She's not a sorceress, she's a victim." But even Agnes couldn't deny the evidence. The kingdom was falling apart, and the only person who seemed to have predicted it was the mute princess, the one they had all dismissed, ignored, and betrayed. Fear, like a creeping vine, choked the once vibrant kingdom. People whispered in hushed tones, afraid to speak Evelyne's name aloud, lest they attract her wrath. The court, once a hub of gossip and intrigue, was now a somber gathering of anxious nobles, their faces pale, their laughter silenced. The king, his authority crumbling along with the palace walls, issued proclamations, offering rewards for anyone who could break the curse, for anyone who could capture the sorceress who had once been his daughter. But no one dared to answer his call. The fear of Evelyne's power, of her wrath, was too great. And so, the kingdom of Eldoria, once a beacon of prosperity and peace, descended into a state of fear and paranoia, its people haunted by the whispers of the sorceress, the princess who had finally found her voice, a voice that could shatter kingdoms and break hearts. Duke Kilian of Vardenfell was not a man easily fooled. He had built his dukedom on a foundation of shrewdness, a keen eye for detail, and a healthy dose of skepticism. So when the news arrived from Eldoria, carried by a breathless messenger, of Princess Evelyne's alleged treason, Kilian's first reaction wasn't shock or outrage, but a raised eyebrow and a thoughtful frown. "Treason?" he'd mused, stroking his neatly trimmed beard, his eyes narrowed in suspicion. "The mute princess, who wouldn't hurt a fly, is accused of plotting against the crown? That's convenient, isn't it?" The messenger, a young man with more enthusiasm than sense, stammered, "But your grace, the evidence is irrefutable. They found letters, secret meetings, a whole conspiracy." Kilian cut him off with a wave of his hand. "Conspiracies are like fine wine, my boy," he said, his voice laced with a dry amusement. "They require careful crafting, the right ingredients, a certain vintage, and something about this one smells rather off." He had met Evelyne only once, during the betrothal negotiations. She had been quiet, of course, but her eyes, he remembered, had held a gentle intelligence, a quiet strength that belied her fragile appearance. He found it hard to believe that this same woman, who couldn't even speak a word in her own defense, could be capable of orchestrating a treasonous plot. "Tell me," he said to the messenger, his voice sharp, "did the princess confess to these crimes?" The messenger shifted uncomfortably. Well, no, Your Grace, but she is a sorceress now? Perhaps she used her magic to. Killian's frown deepened. Sorceress, he scoffed. That's a new one. Last I heard, she was a mute princess, not a wielder of dark magic. He dismissed the messenger with a wave of his hand, his mind already churning with suspicion. Something didn't add up. The timing, the evidence, the sudden transformation of a mute princess into a powerful sorceress. It all seemed too convenient, too orchestrated. He summoned his advisors, a motley crew of seasoned warriors, shrewd diplomats, and one particularly insightful raven named Corvus, who, despite his lack of opposable thumbs, had a knack for spotting inconsistencies. What do you make of this, my friends? Killian asked, pacing the length of his council chamber, the Eldorian missive clutched in his hand. Treachery, Your Grace! Boomed Sir Gareth, his captain of the guard, a man who saw every problem as a nail and his sword as the hammer. We should march on Eldoria, avenge the insult, and claim the princess's dowry for ourselves. Patience, Gareth, Killian cautioned, his voice calm but firm. There's more to this story than meets the eye. I smell a rat, and I intend to find it. He spent the next few days poring over the reports, interrogating messengers, and consulting with Corvus, who, after pecking at the missive for a while, declared it riddled with holes and smelling of desperation. The more he investigated, the more convinced he became that Evelyne was innocent, that she had been framed, sacrificed for some unknown purpose. A sense of injustice, a protectiveness he hadn't expected stirred within him. He had never met the woman, barely exchanged a few words with her, yet he felt compelled to defend her, to uncover the truth, to bring her justice. Prepare my horse, he ordered Gareth, his voice filled with a newfound determination. We ride for Eldoria. I'm going to find the sorceress princess and hear her side of the story. And with that, Duke Killian of Vardenfell embarked on a quest, a journey that would lead him not only to the truth behind Evelyne's alleged treason, but also to a woman who would challenge his beliefs, ignite his passions, and change his destiny forever. Killian's search for Evelyne was less a regal procession and more let's just call it an adventure. He wasn't exactly sure where to start. Eldoria was a mess, a kingdom seemingly designed by a committee of disgruntled landscape architects and vengeful weather gods. Fields were barren, rivers resembled inkwells, and even the local wildlife seemed to have developed a serious attitude problem. Killian narrowly avoided being pecked by a particularly aggressive flock of mutated chickens. His first stop was a small village on the outskirts of the capital. The villagers, a mix of wide-eyed fear and grumbling resentment, weren't exactly forthcoming. The sorceress? They'd whisper, clutching their lucky charms and eyeing Killian with suspicion. She's evil, I tell you. She cursed us all. Cursed you with what exactly? Killian would ask, trying to keep his voice patient. Did she turn your children into frogs? Did she steal your prize-winning goat? Worse, one villager wailed. My turnips, they've all gone black. And my ale, it tastes like, well, let's just say it's not ale anymore. Killian sighed. This was going to be a long journey. He moved on, following rumors and whispers, his search taking him through desolate farmlands, haunted forests, and the occasional suspiciously cheerful group of hermits who seemed remarkably unaffected by the general doom and gloom. He encountered those who feared Evelyne, painting her as a monster, a destroyer of worlds. She's a demon in disguise, they'd shriek, brandishing pitchforks and torches. She must be stopped. Killian, who had faced down charging boars, negotiated with goblin merchants, and once accidentally set his trousers on fire while trying to roast a marshmallow, wasn't easily intimidated. He'd simply raise an eyebrow, give them a look that suggested they were perhaps overreacting, and move on. Then there were those who had benefited from the curse. A particularly enterprising group of merchants had cornered the market on purified water, selling it at exorbitant prices to the parched populace. They weren't exactly keen on the sorceress being found and the curse being lifted. The unfortunate situation in Eldoria is a tragedy, one portly merchant said, wiping a tear of crocodile, Killian suspected, from his eye. But, sometimes these things happen. It's all part of the circle of life. Killian just smiled politely and continued his search. Finally, after weeks of wandering, he stumbled upon a hidden grove, a small oasis of green amidst the desolation. And there, amidst the whispering trees and the babbling brook, he found her. She was no longer the meek princess he remembered. She was different, powerful, radiant, and radiating an aura that suggested she could probably turn him into a toad if she felt like it. She was surrounded by nature, the plants seemingly bending towards her, the animals unafraid. A majestic raven perched on her shoulder, regarding Killian with an intelligence that made him slightly nervous. "You've been looking for me, Duke Killian," she said, her voice soft but strong, carrying a hint of magic that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. Killian, despite his years of training and his experience facing down all manner of threats, felt a sudden dryness in his throat. This wasn't just a sorceress. This was Evelyne, transformed, empowered, and radiating a dangerous kind of beauty that made him question everything he thought he knew about the world, about magic, about, well, everything. "Princess Evelyne," he said, his voice a little shaky. I I'm not a princess anymore, Duke," she interrupted, her eyes sparkling with an amusement that sent a shiver down his spine. "I'm something more." The air crackled with unspoken power as Killian stood before Evelyne. She was no longer the timid princess he remembered. Gone was the meekness, the fragility. In its place was a presence that radiated strength, confidence, and a touch of something wild. Her eyes, once gentle and filled with a quiet sadness, now held a spark of untamed magic, a knowing glint that made Killian's heart pound in his chest. "You've been looking for me, Duke Killian," she said, her voice soft yet resonant, carrying a hint of magic that danced on the wind. It was a voice that commanded attention, a voice that spoke of power, not pity. Killian, despite his years of training and his experience facing down all manner of threats, felt a sudden dryness in his throat. He had envisioned this encounter countless times during his journey, rehearsing his questions, formulating his accusations. But now, faced with this transformed woman, his carefully crafted words seemed inadequate, almost foolish. "Princess Evelyne," he began, his voice a little shaky. I'm not a princess anymore, Duke," she interrupted, her lips curving into a slow, knowing smile. "I'm something more." Killian swallowed, his gaze sweeping over her. She was dressed in simple, flowing robes of deep forest green, adorned with intricate embroidery that seemed to shimmer and shift in the dappled sunlight. The raven on her shoulder, its obsidian eyes gleaming with an unnerving intelligence, regarded him with an air of detached amusement. "More?" he echoed, his voice regaining its usual steadiness. "What exactly are you, Evelyne?" "A sorceress," she replied, her voice calm, her gaze unwavering. "The one they call the Curse of Eldoria." Killian's hand instinctively went to the hilt of his sword, but he stopped himself. He wasn't facing a cowering princess anymore. He was facing a woman who wielded a power that could reshape kingdoms. He needed to tread carefully. "The curse," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "The kingdom is in ruins. The people are suffering. They say you are responsible." Evelyne's smile widened, but it held no warmth, only a hint of cold amusement. "And what do you say, Duke? Do you believe the whispers? Do you believe I am a monster? A destroyer?" Killian met her gaze, his own eyes searching hers, trying to discern the truth beneath the surface of her power. He saw pain there, yes, and anger, but he also saw a strength, a resolve that he couldn't help but admire. "I believe," he said slowly, "that there is more to this story than I have been told." Evelyne's expression softened slightly, a flicker of something that might have been gratitude, or perhaps just amusement crossing her features. "You are perceptive, Duke. Unlike the rest of the world, you are willing to look beyond the surface, to seek the truth." "And what is the truth, Evelyne?" Killian asked, his voice low. "The truth," she replied, her voice laced with a bitter edge, "is that I was betrayed by my own family, by the kingdom I served. They plotted my death, framed me for crimes I did not commit. They sought to silence me, to erase me from existence. And you? You retaliated, Killian finished, his gaze sweeping over the desolate landscape, the withered fields, the poisoned rivers, the crumbling palace in the distance. I spoke, Evelyne corrected him, her voice echoing with a chilling power. They silenced me for years, Duke. They thought they could control me, use me, discard me. But they were wrong. They underestimated me. They underestimated the power of a voice that had been silenced for too long. A tense silence hung in the air, broken only by the rustling of the leaves and the distant cawing of the raven. Killian studied her, his mind racing, trying to reconcile the meek princess he had met years ago with the powerful sorceress before him. "What do you want, Evelyne?" he asked finally, his voice carefully neutral. Evelyne's smile returned, this time with a hint of steel in it. "I want justice, Duke," she said, her voice ringing with a chilling resolve. "And I will have it, even if I have to tear this kingdom apart to get it." Killian found himself in a bit of a pickle. Here he was, in the middle of a cursed kingdom, facing a sorceress princess who could probably turn him into a newt with a flick of her wrist, and he had a decision to make. Hand her over to the very people who had betrayed her, or, well, not. This wasn't exactly in the How to Woo Your Bride handbook, he thought, running a hand through his already disheveled hair. Though, to be fair, I don't recall the chapter on what to do when your fiancé curses an entire kingdom. He studied Evelyne, who was watching him with an unnerving calmness, the raven on her shoulder mirroring her expression with an uncanny accuracy. Killian had always prided himself on his ability to read people, but Evelyne was a puzzle wrapped in an enigma sprinkled with a dash of potentially catastrophic magic. "So," he said, breaking the silence, "justice, you say? And what does that look like exactly? Turning the entire kingdom into a giant mushroom farm?" Evelyne's lips twitched with amusement. "Tempting, but no, I have other plans." "Care to elaborate?" Killian asked, raising an eyebrow. "Because, destroy everything isn't exactly a detailed business plan." Evelyne, sensing his skepticism, decided to offer a demonstration. She raised her hand and, with a graceful gesture, summoned a whirlwind of leaves and petals that danced around them, forming a miniature tornado that hummed with magic. Killian, despite his initial apprehension, found himself mesmerized by the display, the raw power she wielded both terrifying and exhilarating. "I can control the elements," she explained, her voice calm amidst the swirling vortex. "I can bend nature to my will. I can heal or destroy." She lowered her hand, and the whirlwind dissipated, leaving a shower of fragrant petals in its wake. Killian, still slightly dizzy from the display, stared at her with a newfound respect. "Okay," he said, "that's impressive, but turning the king into a frog isn't exactly going to solve anything, is it?" Evelyne smiled, a genuine smile this time, and Killian felt his heart skip a beat. "No," she agreed, "it's not, but it's a start." She explained her plan, a plan that involved exposing the truth of the conspiracy, holding those responsible accountable, and using her newfound power to rebuild the kingdom, to create a society where justice and fairness prevailed. Killian listened, his initial skepticism giving way to a grudging admiration. She wasn't just a sorceress seeking revenge. She was a leader, a visionary, a woman who had been wronged and was now determined to right the wrongs, not just for herself, but for the entire kingdom. "It's a risky plan," he said, his voice thoughtful, "but I like it." He extended his hand towards her, a gesture of trust, of alliance. "I'm in, Evelyne. Let's bring those treacherous snakes to justice and build a better kingdom." Evelyne hesitated for a moment, her eyes searching his, gauging his sincerity. Then, with a smile that lit up her face, she took his hand, her touch sending a jolt of unexpected warmth through him. "Thank you, Killian," she said, her voice filled with gratitude and a hint of something more. And in that moment, amidst the ruins of a cursed kingdom, a dangerous alliance was forged, a bond of trust and shared purpose that would challenge the foundations of power, reshape destinies, and perhaps, just perhaps, ignite a love story that would be whispered through the ages. Killian, ever the pragmatist, decided the best way to understand the mess in Eldoria was to see it for himself. With Evelyne as his somewhat intimidating tour guide, they ventured out of the hidden grove and into the heart of the cursed kingdom. The devastation was worse than he had imagined. Fields that had once been golden with wheat were now barren wastelands. The once bustling capital city was eerily silent, its streets deserted, its buildings crumbling. Even the palace, once a symbol of Eldoria's majesty, was now a cracked and crumbling ruin. But it wasn't just the physical destruction that disturbed Killian. It was the despair in the eyes of the people, the fear that clung to them like a shroud. They looked at Evelyne with a mixture of awe and terror, whispering her name like a curse. "Sorceress," they hissed, shrinking back as she passed. "Destroyer!" Killian, however, saw something else in their eyes. He saw the pain, the desperation, the longing for a leader who could guide them out of this darkness. And he saw in Evelyne not a monster, but a woman who had been wronged, a woman who was now wielding her power, not for revenge, but for justice. He witnessed her heal a sick child with a touch, her magic mending broken bones and soothing fevered brows. He saw her purify a polluted well, the water turning crystal clear under her command. He watched her coax life back into a withered orchard, the trees blossoming with fragrant flowers, their branches heavy with fruit. "You're not just destroying," he observed, his voice filled with a newfound respect. "You're rebuilding." Evelyne nodded, her eyes filled with a sadness that mirrored the desolation around them. "This kingdom was already broken, Killian," she said, her voice soft. "Broken by greed, by corruption, by the betrayal of those who were supposed to protect it. I am merely clearing the way for something new, something better." Killian, his own skepticism fading with each passing day, found himself increasingly drawn to her strength, her compassion, her unwavering determination to create a better world. He saw the toll the curse was taking on her, the weariness in her eyes, the burden of responsibility she carried. And he felt a surge of protectiveness, a desire to shield her, to help her, to stand by her side as she faced the challenges ahead. He began to investigate the conspiracy against her, discreetly questioning courtiers, servants, and even the imprisoned King Alaric. He uncovered a web of deceit, of lies, of betrayals that ran deeper than he had imagined. He learned of Queen Isolde's ambition, Selene's jealousy, and the king's weakness, his willingness to sacrifice his own daughter for political gain. The more he learned, the more his anger grew, his loyalty to Evelyne solidifying into an unbreakable bond. He had been prepared to marry a princess, a pawn in a political game, but he had found a sorceress, a leader, a woman who was not afraid to challenge the status quo, to fight for what she believed in, to reshape the world in her own image. And as he stood beside her, watching her heal the land, her magic a beacon of hope in the darkness, he knew that he had made the right choice, that he had found his place, not as a duke, not as a husband, but as an ally, a confidant, a protector of the woman who was destined to become a legend. Lady Seline had always lived in Evelyne's shadow, a shadow that had grown impossibly long and dark since the curse. Even in her silence, Evelyne had possessed a certain presence, a quiet dignity, a gentle grace that Seline, despite her flamboyant dresses and witty remarks, could never quite replicate. Now, with the kingdom crumbling around them, with Evelyne hailed as a sorceress, a figure of both fear and awe, Selene's jealousy festered, a bitter poison that consumed her thoughts. "It's not fair!" she'd rage, pacing her opulent chambers, the once pristine decor now marred by cracks and mildew. "She's the one who cursed the kingdom. She's the reason we're all suffering." And yet they whisper her name with reverence, while I'm just Seline. She had always craved attention, the adoration of the court, the envy of other ladies. But now, with the kingdom in chaos, the court was preoccupied with survival, their attention focused on the sorceress who held their fate in her hands. Selene's own position was precarious. With the king imprisoned, her mother disgraced, and the court in disarray, her influence had waned. The nobles who had once fawned over her now avoided her, their eyes filled with suspicion, their whispers laced with blame. "She's the queen's daughter," They murmured, their voices laced with disdain. She must have known about the plot. Perhaps she even helped. Seline, terrified of losing her status, her privileges, the life she had always known, became desperate. She had to do something, anything, to regain her footing, to prove her loyalty, to reclaim the attention she craved. She remembered the old stories, the whispers of forbidden magic, of ancient rituals that could grant power, that could alter destinies. She sought out the court scholar, a wizened old man with a reputation for dabbling in the arcane arts. "Tell me," she demanded, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and determination, "how do I break the curse? How do I defeat the sorceress?" The scholar, his eyes gleaming with a disturbing light, smiled a knowing smile. "The curse is powerful, Lady Seline," he said, his voice a raspy whisper. "It is fueled by a lifetime of pain, of betrayal, of silenced rage. To break it, you would need a sacrifice." "A sacrifice," Seline echoed, her heart pounding with a mixture of dread and excitement. "Yes," the scholar confirmed, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial hush. "A sacrifice of equal value, a life for a life, a soul for a soul." Celine's mind raced, her thoughts turning to Evelyne, to the power she wielded, to the fear she inspired. Could she sacrifice Evelyne to break the curse? Would that be enough to redeem herself? To regain her position? To become the savior of the kingdom? The idea once planted took root in her mind, growing like a poisonous weed, choking out any lingering doubts, any remnants of the affection she had once felt for her half-sister. She had always envied Evelyne, her quiet strength, her gentle spirit. Now she saw a chance to not only defeat her, but to usurp her power, to become the hero that Eldoria needed. "Tell me more," she whispered, her eyes gleaming with a dangerous light, her heart filled with a dark determination that would lead her down a path of no return. Seline, armed with the scholar's cryptic instructions, embarked on a quest for dark magic that would make even a seasoned necromancer raise an eyebrow. She wasn't exactly sure where to find the sacrifice material, but she figured if it was dark and magical, it probably wasn't hanging out at the local farmer's market. Her search led her to dusty libraries filled with cobwebs and suspiciously stained tomes, whispered conversations with shady characters in dimly lit taverns, and a particularly harrowing encounter with a fortune teller who smelled strongly of catnip and kept referring to her as my little chickadee. She learned of forgotten rituals, ancient incantations, and ingredients that ranged from the bizarre, eye of newt, obviously, to the downright disturbing. Let's just say it involved a midnight stroll through the royal crypt and leave it at that. Seline, who had previously considered a chipped nail a major crisis, found herself wading through moral gray areas with increasing enthusiasm. "A small sacrifice for the good of the kingdom," she'd muttered to herself, conveniently ignoring the fact that the good of the kingdom mostly meant her own personal gain. Her desperation grew with each failed attempt. She tried brewing potions that fizzled and smelled like burnt hair. She attempted chanting incantations that resulted in nothing more than a mild headache and a visit from a rather irate ghost. She even tried sacrificing a particularly fluffy white rabbit, which, much to her dismay, only earned her the wrath of the royal rabbit keeper and a hefty fine. The pressure was mounting. The kingdom was crumbling. The people were suffering, and the whispers of Evelyne's power grew louder with each passing day. Seline felt the weight of expectation, the pressure to save the kingdom, to prove herself worthy, to finally escape Evelyne's shadow. She stumbled upon a hidden grove, a place shrouded in an unnatural stillness, where the air hummed with a strange, unsettling energy. Here, amidst gnarled trees and moss-covered stones, she found what she was looking for, a forgotten altar, stained with the residue of countless dark rituals. A figure emerged from the shadows, cloaked and hooded, its face obscured by darkness. "You seek power, Lady Seline?" The figure rasped, its voice like the rustling of dead leaves. Seline, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and excitement, nodded eagerly. "I need to break the curse," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I need to save the kingdom." The figure chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "The curse is powerful, child. It demands a great sacrifice. Are you willing to pay the price?" Seline hesitated, her mind flashing back to the scholar's words, the image of Evelyne's face, her gentle eyes, her quiet strength, but the desire for power, The need to escape her sister's shadow was too strong to resist. "Yes," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm willing to do anything." The figure smiled, a slow, chilling smile that sent a shiver down Celine's spine. "Then let us begin," it whispered, its voice laced with a dark promise. And as the moon bathed the grove in an eerie light, Seline, driven by envy and desperation, crossed a line, a point of no return, her actions setting in motion a chain of events that would have far-reaching consequences for herself, for Evelyne, and for the entire kingdom. Seline, buzzing with the dark energy of the ritual, returned to the crumbling palace, a triumphant smirk playing on her lips. She had done it. She had performed the ritual, offered the sacrifice. A rather unfortunate incident involving a stray cat and a particularly grumpy gnome. Let's just say the royal gardeners were not amused. Now, all that remained was to witness the curse break, to bask in the adoration of the court, to finally claim her rightful place as the savior of Eldoria. But things, as they often do in stories involving dark magic and questionable life choices, didn't quite go according to plan. The curse, instead of vanishing in a puff of glitter and good vibes, intensified. The earth shook with renewed vigor, cracks spider-webbing across the palace walls like a particularly aggressive game of connect the dots. The rivers, already resembling a toxic sludge smoothie, started bubbling ominously, emitting a smell that could knock out a troll. And then there were the visions. Seline started seeing things, not just your average, everyday hallucinations, mind you, but vivid Technicolor flashbacks of events she had no memory of. She saw herself whispering poisonously in the king's ear, fueling his doubts about Evelyne. She saw herself planting forged letters, orchestrating secret meetings, manipulating events with a cunning that surprised even herself. It was like watching a particularly twisted play, starring a villainous version of herself that she couldn't quite believe was real. "Surely that's not me," she'd think, staring at her reflection in a cracked mirror. "I'm not evil." But the visions persisted, growing more vivid, more undeniable, until the truth, like a festering wound, burst open, its poison seeping into her soul. She confronted her mother, Queen Isolde, in the ruins of the royal gardens, the once pristine rose bushes now withered and thorny. "Mother," she accused, her voice trembling with a mixture of horror and betrayal. Did we poison the Duke's first wife? Did we frame Evelyne? Was it all a lie?" Isolde, her carefully crafted composure finally cracking, stared at her daughter with a mixture of fear and defiance. "Lies? There are no lies, Seline. Only necessary actions, sacrifices for the good of the kingdom." "The good of the kingdom?" Seline scoffed, her voice rising in disbelief. "Or the good of ourselves? You were jealous of Evelyne, of her kindness, of the love the people had for her. You wanted her gone, out of the way, so you could control the king, control the court, control everything." Isolde, her face pale, her eyes filled with a desperate anger, lunged at Seline, her fingers digging into her daughter's arm. "Don't you dare speak to me like that, you ungrateful wretch. I did it all for you, for our family, to secure your future." Seline, tears streaming down her face, wrenched herself free. "My future! You've destroyed my future! You've destroyed everything, the kingdom, our family, my own soul." She stumbled back, her gaze fixed on the crumbling palace, a symbol of the lies and betrayals that had poisoned their lives. The truth, like a blinding light, had exposed the darkness within her, the darkness she had inherited from her mother, the darkness that had driven her to seek forbidden magic, to sacrifice innocence, to betray the one person who had ever truly cared for her. And as she stood there, amidst the ruins of her world, Seline finally understood the price of her envy, the cost of her ambition. She had sought power, but she had found only despair. She had sought to escape Evelyne's shadow, but she had only cast herself into a deeper darkness. Seline, haunted by the visions of her own treachery, stumbled through the ruined palace gardens, her once pristine gown torn and muddied, her carefully styled hair a tangled mess. She had to find Evelyne, had to confess, had to beg for forgiveness. The scholar's words echoed in her mind. To break the curse, you would need a sacrifice of equal value. But what he hadn't told her was the true sacrifice required wasn't a life, but an apology, a genuine, heartfelt apology from the one who had inflicted the deepest wound. She found Evelyne in the hidden grove, a serene figure amidst the chaos, her magic a soothing balm on the ravaged land. But the serenity was deceptive. Seline saw the pain in Evelyne's eyes, the hurt that ran deeper than any curse, the betrayal that had hardened her heart. "Evelyne?" Seline gasped, her voice raw with guilt and desperation. I need to speak with you." Evelyne turned, her gaze cold and distant, her silence a judgment more damning than any words. "I know," Seline continued, her voice cracking. "I know about the plot, the poison, the lies. I saw it all. In my mind, I was a part of it." She fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face, her carefully constructed facade crumbling like the palace walls. "I'm so sorry, Evelyne. I was jealous. I was weak. I betrayed you." Evelyne remained silent, her expression unreadable, her magic swirling around her like a protective barrier. "Please, Evelyne," Seline begged, her voice choked with sobs. "Forgive me. I know I don't deserve it, but please. The kingdom is falling apart. The curse, it's getting worse. Only you can break it." Evelyne finally spoke, her voice low and chilling, devoid of the warmth Seline remembered. "Forgive you? After what you did? After you helped them poison my husband-to-be? After you plotted my death?" I know, Seline cried, her head bowed in shame. "I was horrible. I was selfish. But I've changed. I see the truth now. Please, Evelyne, give me a chance to redeem myself." Evelyne's eyes hardened, the pain of betrayal etched deep in their depths. "Redemption? Is that what you seek, Seline? After all the pain you caused? All the suffering you inflicted?" She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper that sent shivers down Celine's spine. "You were never my friend, Seline. You were always jealous, always envious. You delighted in my silence, in my pain, and now you beg for my forgiveness? Now, when the kingdom is crumbling, when your own position is threatened?" Seline, her heart breaking, looked up at her sister, her eyes filled with a desperate plea. "Please, Evelyne, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but the kingdom, the people, they need you. They need you to break the curse." Evelyne's gaze swept over the ravaged landscape, the withered fields, the poisoned rivers, the crumbling city in the distance. She saw the suffering, the despair, the consequences of her own actions, but she also saw the betrayal, the cruelty, the years of silent pain that had led her to this moment. "No, Seline," she said, her voice firm, her resolve unwavering. "I will not forgive you. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever." She turned away, her figure receding into the shadows of the grove, leaving Seline kneeling in the dirt, her tears falling like rain on the parched earth, her heart shattered by the weight of her own betrayal and the unforgiving silence of her sister. Evelyne, having delivered the ultimate nope to Celine's plea for forgiveness, decided it was time to take her show on the road. She wasn't about to let those who had orchestrated her downfall just sit around in their crumbling palace, sipping lukewarm tea and reminiscing about the good old days when they were trying to off her. Oh no, it was payback time. With Killian by her side, he was getting quite good at the whole supportive yet slightly terrified consort thing, and a flock of increasingly sassy ravens as her aerial entourage, she marched on the capital. The remaining members of the court, huddled in what was left of the throne room, a rather drafty affair with a distinct lack of ceiling, were, to put it mildly, freaking out. Queen Isolde, her usual composure replaced by a frantic application of rouge and a rather impressive collection of nervous tics, was attempting to maintain order, but her authority had pretty much gone the way of the palace's structural integrity. "Silence!" she shrieked, her voice cracking like a poorly maintained lute string. "We must maintain decorum, even in the face of unforeseen circumstances." The nobles, a collection of pale faces and trembling hands, weren't exactly reassured. They shuffled their feet, avoided eye contact, and generally resembled a flock of pigeons caught in a hailstorm. Then Evelyne entered. The room fell silent. Even the pigeons, actual pigeons, not the metaphorical noble kind, seemed to hold their breath. Evelyne, radiating an aura of power that would make a dragon whimper, surveyed the scene with a chilling calmness. Well, 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 she said, her voice echoing through the ruined hall. Look what the cat dragged in, or rather what the curse didn't quite manage to obliterate. Queen Isolde, attempting to regain some semblance of control, puffed out her chest and declared, Evelyne, you wicked girl! How dare you return here after what you've done? Evelyne raised an eyebrow, a gesture that could curdle milk at 50 paces. What I've done is, old darling, let's not play the amnesia game. I seem to recall a certain conversation about poison, treason, and a rather unfortunate plot to dispose of yours truly. The court gasped. Whispers erupted like a plague of startled sparrows. Isolde, her face turning a rather fetching shade of puce, sputtered, Lies, slander, you sorceress! You've bewitched them all! Evelyne just smiled, a slow, predatory smile that made the room temperature drop 10 degrees. Bewitched them? No, Isolde. I simply gave them a voice to speak the truth that you have been so desperately trying to bury. She turned her attention to the assembled nobles, her gaze sweeping over them like a judge passing sentence. You all knew, she said, her voice ringing with a chilling clarity. You knew of their plot, their treachery, their lies, and yet you remained silent. You chose to protect your own positions, your own comforts, rather than stand up for what was right. The nobles, their faces pale with shame and fear, averted their gazes, their silence a damning confession. Evelyne, satisfied with their reaction, turned back to Isolde. As for you, my dear stepmother, she said, her voice laced with a chilling sweetness, you have a choice. You can confess your crimes, beg for the forgiveness of the kingdom, and accept the consequences. Or, she paused, letting the threat hang in the air. Isolde, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her power slipping through her fingers like sand, knew she had no choice. I confess, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I orchestrated the plot against Evelyne. I poisoned the Duke's wife. I framed Evelyne for treason. It was all me. The court erupted in a cacophony of gasps and cries. Evelyne, however, remained calm, her gaze fixed on Isolde, her expression unreadable. And what do you say, King Alaric? She asked, her voice cutting through the chaos. The king, his face pale, his eyes filled with a mixture of fear and regret, emerged from the huddled crowd. I was weak, he stammered, his voice barely a whisper. I allowed myself to be manipulated. I failed my daughter. Evelyne nodded, her expression softening slightly. You did, she agreed. But weakness can be forgiven. Betrayal, not so easily. She turned back to the court, her voice ringing with authority. The truth has been revealed. Justice will be served. And Eldoria, she declared, her eyes blazing with a newfound power, will be reborn. Evelyne's curse, initially a weapon of raw, untamed rage, became something more. It wasn't just a destructive force. It was a catalyst, a brutal but necessary pruning of a kingdom overgrown with corruption and decay. The initial devastation was undeniable. Fields lay barren, rivers ran black, and the palace itself resembled a particularly dramatic ruin. But from the ashes of the old Eldoria, a new kingdom began to emerge. The curse, in its strange and unpredictable way, had targeted the rot at the heart of the kingdom. The lands of the corrupt nobles, those who had profited from the people's suffering, were the most severely affected. Their fields turned to dust, their wells ran dry, their once lavish estates crumbled into ruin. Those who had clung to the old ways, resisting change and clinging to their power, found themselves stripped of everything. But the common people, those who had suffered the most under the old regime, found a strange resilience in the face of adversity. They banded together, sharing resources, supporting each other, rebuilding their lives with a newfound sense of community. The curse, in its indiscriminate destruction, had inadvertently leveled the playing field, forcing everyone to rely on each other, to work together to survive. Evelyne, with Killian by her side, traveled throughout the ravaged kingdom, her magic now a force of healing, not destruction. She purified the rivers, coaxed life back into the barren fields, and taught the people new ways of farming, new methods of irrigation, drawing on the knowledge she had carried with her from another life. She didn't just rebuild the physical infrastructure, she rebuilt the very fabric of society. She abolished the old feudal system, where the nobles held absolute power and the commoners were little more than serfs. She established a new system based on merit, where people were judged by their skills and their contributions, not their lineage. She created councils of elected representatives, giving the common people a voice in their own governance. She established schools and academies, open to all, regardless of social class or gender, believing that education was the key to unlocking the true potential of her kingdom. Her reforms were met with resistance, of course. Those who had profited from the old system, the remnants of the old nobility, clung to their lost power, whispering of rebellion, plotting against the sorceress queen. But Evelyne, with the support of the people and the unwavering loyalty of Killian and her growing army, crushed any dissent with swift and decisive action. She was no longer the meek princess, the victim of their schemes. She was a queen, a powerful sorceress, a force to be reckoned with. She had seen the darkness in their hearts, and she would not allow it to fester again. The kingdom of Eldoria was transformed. It was no longer a land of vast estates and impoverished peasants, but a land of small farms and thriving communities. It was no longer a kingdom ruled by corrupt nobles and a weak king, but a kingdom governed by elected councils and a powerful queen. But the transformation came at a price. The old Eldoria was gone, swept away by the curse and Evelyne's reforms. Many had suffered, many had lost everything. The line between justice and vengeance, between necessary change and ruthless destruction, blurred. Evelyne, despite her good intentions, despite the positive changes she had brought to the kingdom, found herself haunted by the moral ambiguities of her actions. Had she gone too far? Had she become the very thing she had fought against? Had the power she wielded corrupted her, turning her into a tyrant in her own right? She looked at the faces of her people, their eyes filled with gratitude, with hope, with a newfound sense of dignity. She saw the thriving fields, the clear rivers, the rebuilt cities, the tangible proof of her success. But she also saw the scars of the past, the pain of loss, the fear that still lingered in the shadows. She had rebuilt a kingdom, yes, but she had also irrevocably changed it, reshaping its destiny with her magic, her power, her will. And as she looked out over the transformed land, she knew that her legacy would be complex, a tapestry woven with threads of light and shadow, of destruction and creation, of justice and perhaps a touch of unintended cruelty. The curse had broken the kingdom, but it had also, in its strange and unexpected way, set it free. Years spun by like a weaver's loom, crafting a new tapestry for Eldoria. The kingdom, once teetering on the brink of collapse, now pulsed with a vibrant energy. The curse, though a dark chapter in its history, had become a distant memory, a cautionary tale whispered around crackling fires on cold winter nights. Evelyne, her youthful fire tempered by the wisdom of experience, ruled with a firm but just hand. She had learned to control her magic, to wield it not as a weapon, but as a tool for healing, for growth, for creating a better world. She was loved by her people, respected by her allies, and yes, still feared by those who clung to the shadows of the old ways. But the question lingered. Had she found forgiveness? Forgiveness for those who had betrayed her, for those who had sought to destroy her, for herself and the choices she had made. It was a question that haunted her in the quiet moments, in the stillness of the night, as she gazed out at the transformed kingdom, the scars of the past still visible beneath the veneer of prosperity. She had never forgiven Seline, nor her parents. Their betrayal had cut too deep, the wounds too raw to heal. She had offered them justice, a chance to atone for their crimes, but she could not offer them forgiveness. That, she realized, was a burden they had to carry, a consequence of their own choices. But what about herself? Could she forgive herself for the devastation she had wrought, for the pain she had inflicted, even if it had ultimately led to a better world? One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Evelyne found herself drawn to the ruins of the old palace gardens. The once pristine rose bushes, withered and blackened by the curse, had been replaced by a riot of wildflowers, their vibrant colors a testament to the resilience of nature. She sat on a moss-covered stone bench, her fingers tracing the intricate carvings, the remnants of a bygone era. A small brown rabbit hopped into her lap, its nose twitching, its eyes trusting. Evelyn gently stroked its fur, a small smile touching her lips. She had come a long way from the mute princess, locked away in her gilded cage, her voice silenced, her spirit crushed. She had embraced her power, faced her demons, and reshaped her destiny. She had found her voice, not just in the magic that flowed through her, but in the choices she made, the actions she took, the legacy she was creating. But the journey had left its mark. The scars of betrayal, the weight of responsibility, the knowledge of the darkness that lurked within her own heart, these were burdens she would carry forever. She looked out at the transformed kingdom, the bustling cities, the thriving farms, the people who lived and loved and dreamed under her rule. She had built this new Eldoria, from the ashes of the old. She had made mistakes, yes, but she had also learned, grown, and ultimately, she had done what she believed was right. And as the stars emerged, twinkling in the darkening sky, Evelyn realized that forgiveness, like the wildflowers that bloomed in the ruins of the old gardens, was a slow, gradual process, a delicate balance of acceptance and letting go. She might never fully forgive those who had wronged her, nor herself for the choices she had made, but she could learn to live with the past, to embrace the present, and to continue building a future where the mistakes of the past would not be repeated. Her legacy, she knew, would be complex, a tapestry woven with threads of light and shadow, of destruction and creation, of power and compassion. She would be remembered as the sorceress queen, the one who had cursed the kingdom, but also the one who had healed it, who had led it into a new era of prosperity and peace. And as she sat there, in the stillness of the twilight, a single tear rolled down her cheek, a tear not of sadness or regret, but of acceptance, of a quiet understanding that the journey, though fraught with challenges and sacrifices, had ultimately led her to a place of peace, a place where she could finally embrace her power, her voice, her destiny. She was Evelyn, the sorceress queen, the curse of Eldoria, and the architect of its rebirth. And that, she realized, was a legacy worth fighting for.